For more than 1,000 years, scattered across the landscape of medieval Europe, stood some of the most remarkable institutions in all of human history, the monasteries. They were houses of prayer, where men, or in separate communities, women, withdrew from the ordinary world to devote their entire lives to God. But a great medieval monastery was far more than a place of prayer. It was a farm, a factory, a hospital, a hotel, a school, a library, a bank, a brewery, and a powerhouse of art and learning, often the single most important institution for many miles in any direction. Behind their walls, monks lived lives of extraordinary discipline and routine, but they also did some of the most important work of the medieval world, preserving knowledge, caring for the sick, sheltering travelers, and sometimes getting up to things that would surprise you. For the monastery was a deeply human place, and human beings, even holy ones, are full of surprises. Today, we are going to step inside the medieval monastery and discover what life there was really like. The routine, the work, the food, and the famous stories, the intrigues, the scandals, and the wonders that unfolded behind those ancient walls. Using advanced AI trained on the surviving monasteries of Europe, the monastic rules and records, the chronicles written by the monks themselves, the archaeology of monastic life, and the work of historians, we have reconstructed the world inside the medieval monastery. Everything in that world flowed from a single radical idea that a person might give up everything, family, property, freedom, the world itself, in exchange for a life devoted entirely to God. A man who became a monk took vows that reshaped his entire existence. He vowed poverty, giving up all personal property, obedience, surrendering his own will to the authority of his abbot and his rule, and chastity, renouncing marriage and family. He gave up his old name sometimes, and his old life entirely, entering the enclosed world of the monastery, often for the rest of his days. Within those walls, his life was governed with extraordinary precision by the monastic rule, a set of regulations that ordered every hour. The most influential of these rules in Western Europe was written by an Italian monk centuries earlier, and it sought to create a balanced life of prayer, work, and rest, summed up in a famous principle: pray and work. The monk's day was divided between these two great activities, prayer and labor, in a routine so regular and so unchanging that it would continue almost identically, day after day, year after year, for an entire lifetime, and indeed for centuries. The heart of the monk's life was the cycle of prayer. The monks rose in the deep darkness of the night for the first service, and gathered in the church a total of 8 times across each day and night, at fixed hours, to sing the psalms and prayers of the divine office. This unceasing round of worship was the monastery's central purpose and its gift to the world. The monks prayed continuously for themselves, for their patrons, and for all of humanity, keeping up an unbroken stream of devotion rising to heaven. Their days were also marked by silence, for many monastic communities valued silence highly and restricted unnecessary talking, sometimes developing elaborate systems of sign language so that monks could communicate without breaking the silence. The rest of the day was filled with work and with sacred reading, the monks studying holy texts in the cloister, the covered walkway around an open courtyard at the heart of the monastery that was the center of its daily life. It was a life of discipline, repetition, and submission, designed to subdue the individual will and the distractions of the world, and to turn the whole of a man's existence into an offering to God. But the monasteries did not only pray, they worked, and their work transformed the medieval world. Monasteries were often largely self-sufficient communities that had to grow their own food and produce their own goods, and the monks, along with lay brothers and servants, labored at farming, gardening, brewing, baking, and every craft needed to sustain the community. Many monasteries became centers of agricultural innovation and great landowners, clearing forests, draining marshes, and farming on a large scale, growing wealthy and powerful in the process. They became famous for particular products. Monks were master brewers of beer and ale, and master makers of wine, and some monastic recipes for drinks and food survive and are still produced to this day. They kept bees for honey and wax, raised sheep for wool, and produced cheese and other goods. And, most famously of all, in the Scriptorium, the writing room, the monks copied books by hand. In an age before printing, Every book had to be laboriously copied by hand, and the monasteries were the great centers of this work, reproducing the scriptures, the writings of the church, and, crucially, the literature of the ancient classical world, often beautifully decorated with intricate illuminations in brilliant colors and gold. Through this patient labor, the monks preserved an enormous portion of the written heritage of the ancient world through the difficult centuries, keeping alive the knowledge that would later help to fuel the rebirth of European learning. We owe the survival of a great deal of ancient literature directly to the pens of medieval monks. The monastery also served the world beyond its walls in vital ways. Monasteries were the hospitals of the medieval world, caring for the sick, growing medicinal herbs in their gardens, and preserving and developing medical knowledge. They were the hotels of the medieval world, offering hospitality to travelers and pilgrims who could find food and a bed for the night within the monastery's guest quarters, a sacred duty of hospitality the monks took very seriously. They were the welfare system of the medieval world, distributing food and alms to the poor who gathered at their gates. They were centers of education, teaching not only future monks but sometimes the sons of the local nobility. And they were spiritual powerhouses, places where the wealthy and powerful would pay for prayers and masses to be said for their souls, would seek to be buried, and would lavish gifts and lands upon the monks in exchange for spiritual benefits. This made many monasteries extremely wealthy and powerful institutions, and their abbots could be figures of great importance, the equals of nobles, sitting in councils and parliaments and wielding real worldly power. And it is this last point, the wealth and power and very human nature of the monasteries, that leads us to the surprising, the scandalous, and the strange. For monasteries were full of human beings, and human beings do not always live up to their ideals. The historical record is full of intriguing and sometimes scandalous stories from behind the monastery walls. Some monasteries, grown rich and comfortable, drifted far from the strict ideals of poverty and simplicity that had founded them, and reformers periodically arose to denounce the laxity, the luxury, and the worldliness into which some communities had fallen, calling the monks back to stricter observance and founding new, more austere orders in reaction. There were tales of monks who broke their vows, who kept private property, who ate and drank too well, who slipped out of the monastery, who fell into worldly disputes, and who failed in various human ways to live the perfect life they had promised. There were famous scandals, rivalries between monasteries, disputes over relics and lands, and the ordinary frictions of human beings living together in close quarters for a lifetime. The monastic chronicles themselves, written by the monks, sometimes record these failings with surprising frankness. And then there were the wonders, the relics, and the famous encounters that drew the world to the monastery's door. Monasteries were often the keepers of holy relics, the bones of saints, fragments associated with holy figures, objects believed to possess miraculous powers. These relics were the great treasures of the medieval church, and the most famous of them drew enormous numbers of pilgrims who traveled great distances to pray before them, to seek miracles and healing, and to leave offerings, bringing fame and wealth to the monasteries that housed them. Some monasteries became major pilgrimage destinations, their churches built grand and beautiful to receive the crowds of the faithful, and the stories of the miracles worked at their shrines were recorded and spread far and wide. Monasteries were also places where the great and famous of the medieval world came and went. Kings sought counsel and burial there, scholars came to study in their libraries, the sick came seeking healing, the troubled came seeking sanctuary, and the dying came seeking in their final days to take the monastic vows themselves and to die within the holy community in the hope of a better fate in the world to come. The monastery sat at a crossroads of the medieval world, where the sacred and the worldly met, where the most important people and the humblest pilgrims passed through the same gates, and where the great dramas of faith, power, learning, and human frailty all played out behind the same ancient walls. That was life inside the medieval monastery, a place of extraordinary discipline and routine, where men gave up everything to devote their lives to God, rising in the night to pray, keeping silence, working in the fields and the Scriptorium, and following an unchanging rule of prayer and labor day after day for a lifetime. But also a place of astonishing importance to the wider world, the hospital, the hotel, the school, the library, the brewery, the bank, and the welfare system of the medieval age, the institution that preserved the knowledge of the ancient world, cared for the sick, sheltered the traveller, and fed the poor. And a deeply human place too, full of wealth and power and ambition, of scandal and reform, of relics and miracles and pilgrims, of kings and scholars and the dying, where the loftiest ideals of holiness met the ordinary, surprising, and intriguing realities of human nature. The monasteries shaped the medieval world more profoundly than almost any other institution, and their ruins, and the ones that still survive and function to this day, stand as monuments to one of the most remarkable experiments in the entire history of how human beings have chosen to live. The attempt to build, behind high walls, a small society devoted entirely to prayer, work, and the search for God.